Welcome, learners. I am Dr. Tarang Kapoor and I teach philosophy at Miranda House, University of Delhi. In this lecture, under Applied Ethics course, we are discussing business ethics. This is an introductory lecture on business ethics. Business can mean an activity of exchange. One entity, a person, a firm, or anything other, does business with another when it exchanges a good or service for valuable consideration. That is, a benefit such as money. Business can also mean an entity that offers goods and services for exchange, that is, to sell things. Business is a specialized area in which ethics can be applied. In Entry on Business Ethics in Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, how business ethics is defined is, quote, business ethics can thus be understood as the study of ethical dimensions of the exchange of goods and services and of the entities that offer goods and services for exchange. This includes related activities such as the production, distribution, marketing, sale, and consumption of goods and services. Unquote. Business ethics basically refers to the moral principles which are assumed to govern business activities. The purpose of ethics is to lay down norms of operation for the business, to charge fair prices for the customers, to pay taxes to the government on time, to give fair treatment to all the workers involved in the business, and to earn reasonable profits. And there can be a whole list of expectations from a business. Now, questions in business ethics are important and relevant to each one of us. Almost all of us do business or engage in some or the other commercial transaction almost on a daily basis. Many of us spend a major portion of our lives engaged in or preparing to engage in exchange activities on our own or as part of an organization. Business activity shapes the world we live in. Sometimes this is for our own good, and sometimes there are ills which plague the business arena. Business ethics in this current incarnation is a relatively new field, growing by the research of moral philosophers in 1970s and 80s primarily. But if we look into ancient times, scholars have always been writing about ancient codes. For example, ancient code of Hammurabi, or even in traditional Indian literature, there have been works on how to engage in a prosperous business enterprise. So there are three C's of business ethics. The first one is compliance. Compliance deals with moral principles, laws, policies of the company. The second C is contribution. Now, because business is dealing with products and services, it is about quality of products, employment it generates, the core values which are part of the business activity, usefulness or utility of the products which are made. The third C is about consequences of the activity, like social responsibilities towards the stakeholders and shareholders, bankers, employees, customers of organization, maintaining a good public image, among others. There are certain central questions in business ethics then. For instance, questions can be framed based on things and services that can be sold in a business. What procedure can they be sold with? In whose interest should firms be managed? Who should manage the interests of firms? The services, what services do firms owe their workers? Should firms try to solve social issues and social problems? Should there be then corporate social responsibility? We may say that the questions in normative business ethics are variant on the key question then. What is ethical and unethical in any business? A brief discussion about rights and obligations is required to understand the mandate of a business enterprise in terms of fulfilling the rights and obligations. Human being is entitled to rights by law, morality, tradition. An obligation is a responsibility or duty that people have towards one another to see that their rights are protected. No rights are absolute, and conflicts can always be resolved by establishing a priority of rights. Rights related to business then may be articulated as under. There are general rights to life, justice, honesty, truth telling, and freedom. There is a right to have one's life protected as an employer, an employee, or even as a consumer. There is a right to pursue and qualify oneself for employment without any unfair hindrance. There is the right to expect agreements and contracts to be executed fairly. There is a right to establish a business, own property, employ whoever you want to, and make profit out of the business. There is a right to fairness, honesty, truth telling at all levels of business dealings. There is the right to employment security. There is the right to try to get consumers to use products and the right of the consumers to choose which products they wish to buy. Now, given the rights, there are also obligations related to business. Participants in business activities are obliged to be honest and tell the truth. They must be fair and just in dealing with others. They must be sincere and trustworthy in honoring agreements and contracts. They must pay off debts in a fashion agreeable to all parties. They must create a safe atmosphere for employees to work in. They must give effort and perform work for which they will be paid wages. And they must be loyal to employers, employees, and customers within reasonable and ethical limits. Now, there are two divergent approaches to fulfilling these rights and obligations which we have just discussed. So, the first approach says that we can accept the basic elements of capitalism known as free enterprise with the objective to make money. Laissez-faire approach suggests that means of production can be privately owned and that markets featuring voluntary exchanges between buyers and sellers at mutually agreeable prices should play an important role in the allocation of resources. The second approach suggests advocates government control of business. Those who reject capitalism, the first approach, will always see some debates in business ethics about ownership and control as misguided. Free enterprise puts power in the hands of a few to the detriment of many. Government will operate for the good of everyone and eliminate uneven distribution that exists under free enterprise. Now, we need to settle in favor of a moderate approach by encouraging free enterprise with some controls exerted by employee groups, consumer groups, and even government, who can play a role or a system of checks and balances. Now, there are certain characteristic features of business ethics which we need to consider. The first can be business ethics necessarily follows a code of conduct. All businessmen must follow it. It guides in telling what to do, what not to do for the welfare of the society. Then, any business ethics also works with a basic framework for doing a successful business. It provides the social, cultural, economical, legal grounding for conducting a business. Any business then is also grounded on social and moral values, which include self-control, consumer protection, welfare, integrity, service to society, fair treatment of social groups, no exploitation at the workplace, among others. It should provide protection to social groups as well. Business ethics should be protective about consumers, employees, small businessmen, government, stakeholders, shareholders, among others. Also, it requires education and guidance. Education and guidance are necessary components in order to be acquainted with how to apply business ethics. Then there are society's interests which have to be maintained. Main motive of any business is to work towards the development and welfare of the society. Then there has to be a voluntariness in terms of accepting and following the business practices, the good ones, by the businessman himself or herself. It must be not something which is only legally available but not morally acceptable. Respect for the employees should also be considered as a factor in terms of the owner of the organization having an equanimous eye, respectful eye towards the employees. They must value their opinion, treat them with respect, make sure that their efforts are recognized and good reward is given for them. Then, business ethics can also be seen as a relative term because it changes from one business to the other, from one country to the other, from one organization to the other. And another important element is that of integrity. Integrity in business organization is an important character to perform regularly and for the healthy environment at the workplace. This is because healthy competition is the start of any successful journey. Any management and delivery of good services to the public is only possible if the business is grounded in healthy competition. Now, there are two key aspects of business ethics. Number one is about corporate governance. The questions it raises are how businesses are conducted, which ethical policies that are essential for the framework of a good and successful business. All business activities and practices must be based on corporate social responsibility. We are going to have a discussion of this in a separate lecture. However, here about the corporate holding, many profits in businesses must not be the only aim in any business. It is important for every corporate entity to formulate a code of ethics for ethical functioning of that organization. This must be known to all the clients, so transparency has to be maintained. All the stakeholders and stockholders should be aware about it. Corporate governance must stand scrutiny in terms of transparency in dealings, business policies, plans, and activities. Communication mechanisms and information must be available to all to the extent that it does not hamper business progress. This actually goes well with the integrity of business practices and it helps in extracting unbiased loyalty from the employees who work for any organization. So the business must ensure principle of equity, justice to all those who are involved. This helps in promoting and enhancing the dignity of labor, credibility of corporate managements, and people who are associated with any business. It should also promote excellence in development through ethical conduct in this competitive world. Governing rules and regulations put forward by the government must be followed, respected by any business entity. Any unethical conduct that will damage the image of the business world and entity must be avoided by the stakeholders. Now, there are certain issues in corporate governance like insider trading and overboarding. Now, let us try to understand what is the issue of insider trading. Insider trading occurs when shares are bought and sold on the basis of classified secret information. Insider trading is meant to buying or selling a security on the basis of non-public information about the security. Insiders always have an advantage over other investors in the market in terms of knowledge, information, privilege that they could gain profits out of that business. So a lack of transparency in business activities can expose the company to penalties from regulatory governing agencies. Now, if a company has a poor governance policy of this order, then it may result in reputation damage, loss of capital, of course, fines and several other penalties for the organization. The other aspect is that of overboarding. The concept of overboarding refers to director or executive of an organization who sits and works for multiple number of boards. This could lead to unrestricted time commitments, inability to fulfill their own duties, conflict of interest, of course, and adequate policies therefore must be adopted for limiting the number of boards on which any director can serve in their capacity in an organization. Now, there are always debates on ends and means of corporate governance. How firms should be managed, who should manage the firm, who are the stakeholders. The groups most commonly identified are shareholders, employees, the community, suppliers, and customers. But other groups have stakes in the firm as well, including creditors, government, competitors. It makes a great deal of difference that who is a stakeholder and who is a shareholder. What does it mean to balance the interests of stakeholders other than not always giving precedence to shareholders' interests? There are two main views about the proper ends of corporate governance. Number one is the firm should be managed in the best interest of shareholders. It is typically assumed that managing firms in shareholders' best interest requires maximizing their wealth, and in the dominant view about the end of corporate governance in business schools and in business world. Ethicists argue for shareholder primacy on deontological grounds by appealing to rights and duties or consequentialist grounds. On this argument, shareholders own the firm, they hire managers to run it for them on the condition that firm is managed in their interests. Some argue that shareholders do not own the firm. So here comes the second view about the proper ends of corporate governance given to the stakeholder theory. According to stakeholder theory, instead of managing the firm in the best interest of merely the shareholders, managers should seek to balance the interest of the stakeholders, where a stakeholder is anyone who has a stake or interest, including a kind of financial interest in the firm. To this end, the debate between shareholder and stakeholder is about what to do with the residual revenues, the extra income, what's left over after firm is able to meet their contractual obligations to their employees and customers. Now, shareholder theorists think they should be used to maximize shareholders' wealth. However, the stakeholder theorists think they should be used to benefit all the stakeholders involved. Now come to the second factor, finance and accounting. Ethics in accounting and finance practices the same as corporate governance. In accounting and finance practices, there are well formulated ethical rules and regulations. The following are the important canons associated with these practices. Businesses must follow the well laid out norms of accounting practices. Transparency in accounting practice is important to follow, and no attempt should be made to manipulate the accounts that will affect the financial health of the company. Business companies must follow well laid out norms for reporting financial aspects during the annual general meetings. The expenses involved in the businesses must be legitimate, and there should be no fraudulent dealings that cannot be reported in the accounts. Financial audit has a great impact in the financial practices of any company. It has a very crucial social responsibility as it gets true information about the financial health of a company. Now comes the complicated questions about corporate moral agency. One way to think about business is in terms of the moral obligations of the agents who are engaged in the activity. However, the question comes whether individual persons can be seen as moral agents or firms themselves can be seen as moral agents. This is treated as the issue of corporate moral agency or corporate moral responsibility. Here, corporate does not refer to the corporation as a legal entity, but corporate refers to a collective or group of individuals who are involved in a business activity. To be precise, the question is whether firms are moral agents and morally responsible considered as firms, not considered as aggregates of individual members of firms. So we often think and speak as if corporations are themselves morally responsible, but certainly corporations are different in many, many ways from paradigm moral agents like you and me, people who have a moral conscience and have an individual moral responsibility. Corporations cannot be seen as having minds, for one thing, and then we say, oh, the body is something material or a computer. French, a seminal thinker in business ethics, has argued that firms are morally responsible for what they do and indeed should be taken to have full-fledged moral persons having a responsibility over their decisions. He bases this conclusion on the claim that firms have internal decision-making structures, the annual general meetings are held, and certain other board meetings are held through which they cause events to happen, and that's how they act intentionally. However, Donaldson claims that firms cannot be persons but moral agents because they lack important human capabilities, such as ability to pursue their own happiness. In later works, French recanted his claim that firms are moral persons, though not his claim that they are moral agents. Now, debate about corporate moral agency and moral responsibility brings forward the attention to choice. Can decisions of corporations be independent of the decisions of their members? Corporations are seen as an autonomous agent, and since it can choose in the light of values, it is morally responsible. Another issue is that of intention. Then there is an issue of emotion. Can we say that firms have intention? We say they have emotion. Should firms be accountable as one person? So we see a very popular case about British Petroleum itself was morally responsible for polluting the Gulf of Mexico. Or were certain individuals at British Petroleum were responsible for the same? In some cases, there may be no individual who is morally responsible for firms' behavior. And we need to still someone to blame and perhaps someone to punish, because blame and punishment incentivizes somewhere or the other the firm to change its behavior. There are many other issues in business ethics, issues on firms and consumers, what kind of items can be put on sale. Things are commonly said to be inappropriate for sale, for sexual services, surrogacy services, human organs. There are many consequentialist reasons for which are turning markets as commodities, and items like sex and kidneys will, if put on sale, will lead to exploitation of vulnerable people. Then there are questions about product safety and liability. When is a product too unsafe to be sold? Questions about debates between economists, legal scholars, public policy experts, and deliberations are required. Who should be paying for harm if the product causes harm? Then there are seminal issues about advertising. Most of the advertising contains informational component as well as persuasive component. There are particular values which can be promoted through advertising, values like autonomy, values like factual information being propagated. However, there are certain questions and accusations of lying and misrepresentation. What guidelines should be presented for ethically proper advertising? Probably no unsafe product should be advertised as safe. Businesses should not make claims about their products and services that are not true and exaggerated and tall claims. They should not make false claims about medical endorsements. All claims and guarantees should be supported by the evidence that is readily available and transparently available in the light of public. No one who works in advertising industry should have to make claims about products or services that are not true. Then, of course, there are questions about sales, which are central to business. An emerging set of issues concerning refusals to sale. For example, businesses want to sell their goods and services to everyone. However, questions can also be raised about techniques advertisers use to sell. These questions are similar to the ones which we have already asked about advertising. At times, there are complaints that some items were not sold to people freely. So salespersons are, in a sense, final advertisers of the products to consumers. But what if the salesperson denies someone's right to buy a product? Then there are issues about pricing, prices of goods and services. How are they set? And maybe they are set based on aggregate forces of supply and demand. No individual buys or sells a product or anything other than market price on which it is available on. So sellers of goods have some flexibility about how to price their goods and services. There is a discrimination based on willingness to pay at times, or practice of charging more based on the scarcity or demand of the product in the market. So price gouging is another unethical activity, which is a sharp increase in the price of necessary goods, and it was seen in the wake of an emergency caused due to novel coronavirus, which spread across the world in early 2020, wherein we saw that many businessmen, retailers began to charge extremely high prices for hygiene and sanitation products and medical supplies. Now, it is seen that firms and workers are another target area on which business ethicists should work. They have written much about the relationship between employees and employers, and issues between employees and employers interface have been related to issues on hiring and firing the employers, the pay packages, the pay parity labor laws which are made for employer, meaningful work conditions, meaningful and fulfilling purposive work atmosphere. Also issues of whistleblowing, how much transparent is the workplace, now what is the time at which the employer needs to blow the whistle on the secret information which is available and which is unfairly not shared with the larger audience. Now, having said this, let us conclude our lecture by saying business activity raises a host of interesting philosophical issues, as we have seen. Issues of agency, who is a moral agent, who is responsible for making a decision. Of course, issues of truth, honesty, transparency, manipulation, exploitation, justice, beneficence, and many more. I'll conclude my lecture by giving a set of references which learners can refer to if they want to read more in this area. Thank you.